My name is Amélie Lamont. My thesis is titled Also and Anime, Exploring the Technology of Black Imagination. So actually, I just realized that you can't see me, right? My camera's not on. Hold on, I have a fix for that one. 1 second. Okay, let's just put this over here. Oh, okay, much better. There I am. Oof. Sorry about that. I don't know how I forgot that. That was just outrageous. Sorry. Anyway, so like I said, my name is Amélie. I run By Amélie Studio, a Brooklyn-based creative research practice. I'm also the co-founder of Good for POC, People of Craft, and most recently created the Guide to Allyship. A lot of the work that I do centers on creating high-quality resources that empower, educate, and liberate people. But enough about me. Time for a story. So the other day, I was reading Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story. At the end of her TED Talk, she says, when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. I started to think about that. How can you regain that paradise, and how can you reject that single story if you don't know that you can even reject it? I realized that imagination is needed in order for one to move beyond the singularity of a single story. As I started to put my thesis together, a bunch of questions came to my mind. Specifically, okay, I've got imagination. What can I connect to the imagination? Let's look at anime. And so the question I came up with was, why do Black kids find themselves deeply invested in Japanese culture? And, that didn't feel quite right because I'm not a kid anymore. I mean, on the inside I am, but as an adult, I'm not a kid anymore. And this question doesn't really speak to the idea of anime or the imagination. So then I landed on what draws Black USians, my term for Black Americans, to Japanese anime. You see, anime often has very little representation of Black people. And it's interesting because even with that fact, there are tons of Black people who love anime, myself included, and they still watch it. So what is it that is required of these people to be able to engage with this medium that doesn't really show themselves? One day I was walking down the street listening to the musician Moses Sumney, and his song Also, and came on. As you can see, it's a nod to my thesis title. In the song, he talks about this idea of creating spaces for the multiplicities of the Black person. And in order to create space for those multiplicities, you need imagination. And so not only am I Black, I'm queer, I'm femme, I am also, and. Another thinker that inspired my work is Stuart Hall. He wrote this paper titled, What is this Black in Black popular culture? And at the end of the paper, he essentially says that there is no one way to be Black. We should create space for the multiplicities and the diversity of the Black experience across the Afro diaspora. I then found myself tumbling towards Beth Coleman, her paper, Racist Technology. When I tell you this paper lit me up, because if something such as race could be so fraught and so tenuous that could be seen as a technology, what else is a technology? Maybe the imagination is a technology. So it's more like, how do you put these things in people's hands so that they can control it? When I think of race as a technology, race no longer has power over me because it's about how I decide to use and wield it. Same for my imagination. From there, I moved on to Legacy Russell's glitch feminism. Okay, this was interesting. A glitch, a mistake, an error in the technology, right? Okay. Well, if we think about Blackness as an identity, Blackness is technically a glitch in the white canon of white supremacy, right? But there's something really empowering about a glitch. Maybe a glitch is something that allows me to resist and allows me to be more than myself. And I think there's something really powerful, empowering about that. Wrapping it all together, I found Itasha Womack's Afrofuturism. In other words, what we're doing is we're looking at the history of slavery and the history of actions towards Black people in the United States. And we're making sure that our minds are not tethered to this past. We're not chained to this past. Because remember, if you're chained to the past, then you can't imagine a brighter future. Afrofuturism puts down a path so that we can understand and acknowledge the horrors of the past so that we can build a brighter future today. So some of the sources I looked at, I started with Sailor Moon because I loved Sailor Moon growing up. I still love Sailor Moon. Putting everything together, I started thinking about this idea of Sailor Moon's transformation and all the Sailor Soldiers' transformations. I came up with this idea of the glitch of transfiguration. And I'll get into that in a moment, but in Anime Age magazine, there is a quote from one of the producers of Sailor Moon who says, "The Sailor Soldiers are just as strong and intelligent as they are before transforming." Now that's a glitch. That's a glitch to me. Because in other words, if someone is supposed to transform, there's this idea of a before and an after. But that means that I can transform, I can transfigure as a Black person and remain myself. Sailor Moon herself was experiencing the multiplicities of self. And that in itself is a glitch, which is incredibly empowering as a Black person to see. I also looked at queerness. In Sailor Moon S, we're introduced to Haruka Tenno, also known as Sailor Uranus, and the viewer and the characters assume that Haruka is a boy. Taking a line from glitch feminism, Haruka refuses to be hewn to the hegemonic line of a binary body. But you see, the thing is, Haruka's not trying to be a boy or a girl. Haruka just is. She's just existing as she is. She makes no claims or qualms or labels. She's just refusing to hew to the hegemonic line of this binary body. And then finally, I also looked at people like Megan Thee Stallion and Thundercat and other Black visible figures who embraced their inner blurred or Black nerd. It's really interesting because I started to see these connections of these Black celebrities who would loudly profess their love for anime and even weave it into their public personas. I started realizing that, maybe the blurred imagination is a glitch, managing to carve space for itself in the absence of representation and acceptance, moving beyond that single story. So putting it all together into an elevator pitch, I was like, all right, so together, we're diving into the minds of Black nerds to see how they use the tool of anime to shape their imaginations and selves. Because listen, it's not about the tool, it's about how you use the tool. In this world, the imagination is a technology guided by Afrofuturism and inspired by anime, reminding us, Black people, of our power to reject, remix, rework, and reclaim narratives of Blackness from negative mythologies. All right, so it's time for an excerpt. I'm going to bring you over to this website, aaa.amelie.is, and I'm going to read you an excerpt. All right. Can you still see my screen? I don't think you can. So let me...
Amelie, we haven't been able to see your screen. I didn't want to interrupt you.
But why didn't you
only
see
the presentation.
Dang, that's rude. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Dang. Whoops. Sorry, y'all. Okay.
Glitch.
So it was a glitch. It was intended. Duh. Okay. Anyway, so I'm going to read this excerpt while you watch this little animation play. The first time I saw Usagi Tsukino become Sailor Moon, it was like witnessing magic I never knew existed. Holding up a brooch, Usagi yells, "Moon Prism Power! Make up!" The sequence starts with Usagi's hand in the air, and her entire form is a holographic silhouette against a sparkly background. The scene cuts to her face, and in the outline, all you see are her eyes. She blinks twice, and then the camera spirals around her body, where it lands on her chest where the brooch is located. Pink light beams from the brooch, and pink ribbons flow out of it to cover Usagi's silhouetted body in a white unitard. So this is the rest of the animation, speeding it up. There you go. So back to the presentation. I also took all of my research and put it into a podcast titled Please Notice Me, which looks at how Black people across the Afro diaspora use objects of design's past to shape their present selves. Here's a preview of it. It's 5:50 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in 1994. Even as a 6-year-old, I never wake up this early, and I'm not a morning person. But today, I made the effort to wake up early to watch Sailor Moon. Okay. So what's next for me? I'm going to be wrapping up a summer fellowship where I'll put the final touches on my writing, as well as make a companion manga and fan fiction. I'll also add more context to the website that I showed you and more content. I'll also be continuing my studies on the research of technology and Black identity. This fall, I'll be heading to the New School to look at how the syllabus functions as a technology for liberation. And then building upon my podcast, I'd love to create an entire world around it, exploring connections of nostalgia, designed objects, and Black multiplicities and identities. And now that I know that you weren't able to see the slides, I'm just going to quickly go back so that you can see.
Sorry, Amélie, we weren't able to see the avatar. We were for a little bit, but now we see it. But we saw the slides.
Cool. Awesome. Great. I was worried. Okay, great.
Yeah, we saw.
All right. So that's it. Here's my contact information and a picture of me and One Piece's white beard about to grab his cute butt. Thank you so much.